Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Topher Drives, and welcome to a bit of a snowy morning here in Michigan, where I've got a couple of errands to run, and this is what we will be using to complete them, the 2024 Toyota Prius Limited all-wheel drive. Now, this is a car that we already know pretty well. We drove a Prius Prime on the channel earlier this year, or late last year, whatever it was. That was a 2023 model, meaning this is now the second model year of this car, which is crazy, because I remember being in the studio when they pulled the sheet off of this thing, and I was in utter disbelief that what was in front of me was a Prius. But anyways, you know, we kind of already know all the basics on this car. I figured we'd shoot one more drive here in a bit of a snowy climate, I suppose. I don't remember. Was it warm when we drove the last one? I don't know. I filmed so many cars I can't remember. But I figured we'd take you all out on the road and kind of remind you what it's like to live with one of these new Toyota Priuses. So before we do that, let's talk about what we have here in front of us. This is finished in Reservoir Blue, which, funny enough, is the first color that I ever saw on the Prius. It kind of reminds me of the plastic chairs we had in high school, like that kind of that dark blue chair you could crack your back really nice in. Anyways, this one has a light gray interior. It's a limited all-wheel drive model, meaning this is a $40,000 Prius, which sounds absolutely ridiculous, but keep in mind, the Prius still starts at just under 28 grand for the 2024 model year. This one is spec'd out with every option possible. It's all-wheel drive. It has these 19-inch wheels. It has leather interior. So this one, just a hair under $40,000. I think the limited trim is a little bit silly for the Prius, but a lot of the manufacturers stock these super high trim cars in the press fleet, which honestly sometimes is kind of a shame, because I would like to show off base model cars, but this is what we have today. Under the hood, a 2-liter Atkinson cycle, naturally aspirated 4-cylinder engine with an electric motor. Of course, this is a hybrid. It's a Prius. That's what it's built to be. Combined net horsepower, 196 horsepower. But if you go for a front-wheel drive Prius, you only get 194 horsepower. So the all-wheel drive gets you an extra 2. Probably not a good deal considering the extra weight that it adds. Anyways, 139 pound-feet of combined net torque, which doesn't really sound right, but that's the number that I was able to find online pretty much everywhere I looked, so that's the number we're going with today. It has a CVT, obviously it's all-wheel drive, and it weighs just over 3,000 pounds, so it is still, you know, kind of unapologetically Prius, but what a huge departure from the outgoing model. It looks a lot better, and it somehow actually loses a bit of drag, which is hilarious considering how aerodynamically this is shaped. I just filmed this with the Topher, and he compared driving it to driving a Tesla Cybertruck with how kind of slanted back the windshield is. But anyways, let's quickly walk you around this, because it is absolutely freezing. You guys haven't seen my hands doing this all today because they're in my pockets because it's like 26 degrees out. Trying to get used to this season change. Of course, the Limited gets you a power opening rear hatch here, where you can see quite limited trunk space, super high load surface. We have some foam pieces under here to store things under the floor, which I do always like to see because it kind of mitigates things rattling around in the back. Not a ton of room, but we'll kind of talk about what the purpose of this car is when we're on the road and what makes it make sense. Lots of little hidden messages around this car. You can see on the taillight, hybrid reborn, and you'll see it under the hood as well. Speaking of that, before we jump in the back seat, let's show you this 2-liter Atkinson cycle 4-cylinder. Why not? No hood struts on this thing. This reminds me of my Lexus IS300 having the hood prop come down from the top of the hood, but you can see no engine cover or anything on that. Hybrid reborn written out there, and just kind of an honest looking engine bay. It's pretty tight in there though, not a whole lot of room to work on this. I imagine if you removed this cowl piece it may be a bit easier, but since our wipers are so clever and move in such a way to wipe this entire huge windscreen, I imagine your wiper mechanisms and everything are quite large behind that cowl. So I don't know if this is something that you'd really want to work on down the road, but if you buy it new, obviously that's something that you don't have to worry about. But something that manufacturers don't often think about are, what about, you know, 10, 15 years down the road when somebody wants to work on this thing in their garage? They're kind of SOL, as we would say. Okay, let's check out the back seat. You have these electronic door handles right at the C-pillar. I don't think you have any sort of, oh, you do. I take that back. You've got a manual popper right here. if you wanted to use that, if you're locked out of the car or something. Don't know why you wanted to get into the back seat first, but you do at least have that option. Back here, you can see our light gray interior. We'll go ahead and see what space is like. This will be no surprise. It's a little bit tight as far as headroom goes, but set behind myself with the seat in its comfort access position at 5'11", I do have enough legroom. This moves up another few inches when you're actually driving, so my legs wouldn't be touching the seat. This has heated rear seats as an option. We've got 2 USB-C ports, and you've got some cup holders back here too. So I think you could kind of spend some short trips back here if you're commuting with some friends. They wouldn't really have too big of an issue unless they're like over 6'1" or 6'2". I don't really think you'd fit back here. When I sit up all the way, my head does touch the ceiling, and like I said earlier, I'm 5'11". So something to keep in mind if you are planning on using the back seat. May want to consider something like a Corolla Cross Hybrid instead, because that does share the same powertrain as this and some other things as well. Glass roof on this car. It's the most conceivably specced out Prius possible to imagine. Let's jump at this thing and start it up. You can see everything in here is pretty familiar. We all know this car so well by now, like I said, but I want to show you a couple of little things in here that you may not know about. For one, you have a wireless charger here that says #wireless charger in it. However, it does not do a great job of #wireless charging. I have not been able to get my phone to charge at all with it this week, so I've just been running wired Apple CarPlay with one of my 2 front mounted USB-C ports. And under where my phone is sitting lives the #hidden compartment, as you can see there. So you can store some stuff down there, and you know, it's all, I made fun of this in my last Prius video, but you know what? I don't blame the engineers for wanting to do something like this, because cars always take themselves so seriously, and I think the ethos of the Prius has changed a little bit to kind of become this stylish enthusiast vehicle, and you know, why not have a little bit of fun with some stuff? So you go, Prius engineering team. I don't blame you at all for putting a couple silly little messages throughout the cabin and exterior. Heated steering wheel. We have a few options on this. The Topher always runs auto climate control, and I do not, so let's switch that here. A couple of options on this car. We have the camera rear view mirror, which is essentially a necessity in this thing. You can't really see out of that back window without it, so I leave it in the camera mode. It's not a very expensive option, and I'll put the spec sheet down in the description so you guys can see what all this has, but there isn't much. There's that, and then there is the technology package, which gets you the panoramic view, whatever Toyota calls their 360 camera, and parking assist, and then heated rear seats. So this is, I know I've said it already, but this is literally as specced out as you can get on a Toyota Prius. Total price just under 40 grand. The ergonomics in this thing take a little bit of getting used to. We saw this first in the BZ4X, but the Prius kind of has always been like this. We've always had a very high mounted gauge cluster far away in the dash, steering wheel very low down and close to you, though they've moved the gauge cluster a little bit closer, but they haven't really touched the steering wheel, which means you have to drive with this steering wheel down in your lap, essentially. So again, if you're somebody that has some larger legs, I mean, I'm a pretty skinny dude. I weigh about 160 pounds. My legs are like toothpicks, and you know, I only have about this much room under the steering wheel. You could, of course, move it up, but then it blocks the gauge cluster. So you have to kind of strike this fine balance with how you actually drive the Prius, and unfortunately can't really be that big of a human and comfortably operate this thing. I'm going to take my jacket off before we get out on the road. This should be a test people do, because sometimes during the winter you take your jacket off in the driver's seat, and sometimes it's very frustrating to do so. Throw that in the back seat, but seems to be okay here. Center console does sit up a little bit high, but you do have an armrest still and everything that you would need to sit in this car comfortably. So cool. All right, well, let's take it out on the road, see what it's like to drive. You guys know this infotainment. It's the same on every Toyota. It's got wireless CarPlay, but I'm plugged in right now. Wireless Android Auto, of course, as well. So cool. All right, let's go for a drive. There's our optional 360 camera, which will learn what's under the car. It'll record with the front and rear facing cameras, which it was kind of marketed as off-road tech in some of Toyota's trucks, but cool to see it in their cars as well. It's telling me to drive with care as roads may be icy. Yes, indeed. What is it outside? 27 degrees out. In my time spent with the Prius Prime earlier this year, my favorite thing towards the end of the loan was just how much of a space pod you feel like you're in. Like, you kind of just, it's a very cockpit design, and the steering wheel is so little. I mean, very small adjustments with this quite light and quick steering are very satisfying, and it kind of makes this whole experience kind of fun. Makes the car feel very, very nimble, and when you're driving in the city, as this car is mostly intended to do, adds a bit of entertainment. Don't super love how loud and grainy that 2-liter is. And I don't remember the Prius Prime being this loud either. Luckily, it only happens for a few seconds when you take off, and you really only notice it when you're taking off out onto a road like this that has a 55-mile-an-hour limit. You want to get up to speed quickly. You do have to suffer a bit through that 2-liter straining itself, which could explain why Prius drivers do drive so slowly, because they do not want to hear their engine groaning. But then once you're up to speed and you kind of pull your foot back from that accelerator, the engine quiets down quite a bit, and eventually it shuts off altogether. This Prius is rated somewhere in the high 40s combined for MPG. I've done 42 miles to the gallon this week, but keep in mind, it's been very, very cold. Plus, people like Charlie from Daily Motor would tell me that I'm not driving this properly as a hybrid, so it could have to do with a bit of my lead footness as well. A couple of drive modes here in the Prius: Eco, Normal, Sport, and Custom. Let's put it in Sport as we take this corner. Why not? Sport is just going to sharpen up our inputs a bit, add a little bit more weight to this steering. This is flat out. Plenty of torque to pull you out of corners. I know the numbers are very, very underwhelming, and especially for how this car looks on the outside. I know, but consider what this car is meant for, and also consider that this is like 3 seconds faster to 60 than the outgoing Prius. So they have upped the performance a bit for us to complement the looks, which I do appreciate. For tires today, we have a 195 section tire on a 19-inch wheel, which I think is just the most idiotic thing ever for a Prius. We have some Toyo tires, which I think is one of the only choices for this obscure size. But they do actually have a pretty surprising amount of grip here in the cold, wet. But cool. All right, so we're going to jump on the highway, and we'll give you an idea of what it's like to do a short commute in this thing. And then I'm going to grab myself some breakfast/lunch. It's 11 a.m., whatever you want to consider that. And then I have a buddy that is selling a car and wants me to do the photo gallery for him. So we're going to end the video at the dealership he works at. And in fact, the dealership I used to work at in high school. We'll snap some pics of that car, and then that'll wrap it up for us today. So just kind of a short little living with the Prius video. I figured I'm going and running around, might as well take you guys with me. As far as calibration goes and inputs, I think Toyota has gotten this so dialed in. It feels absolutely perfect with the size of this steering wheel. you don't really have to think about your inputs, which is nice. And I think more manufacturers should take that into consideration with how big of a deal steering wheel size is. Most of them do, most of them get it right, but there are some cars that we drive, like Cadillacs, for example, have massive steering wheels, and they don't really feel right in the car. So, speaking of Cadillacs, does this have a spinner? Does this have spinners on it? It does. Oh my goodness, you guys, what a treat. One of the spinners has fallen off, but there is still one on the front. Oh boy, that's funny. Also a Mitsubishi Mirage with a Charmander in the back window. Really nice treat to our NPC traffic today. Love to see it. Man, this Mirage is hustling getting on the highway. Okay. Let's go. I can smell the car. Must have been flat out there for a second. Plenty of room here to merge, get ourselves up to speed without really having to rev out that 2-liter. Can hear all the road intrusion from these 19-inch wheels. That is the fastest a Prius and a Mirage have ever merged on the highway together simultaneously. Let's get our cruise control set. And I'm gonna turn this down slightly here. Set that to a little bit more of a... Cool. We have adaptive cruise in this Prius. Seems to work pretty well. We've got lane keep assist, or lane tracing as Toyota calls it. This will steer for us for quite a while. I want to say about 10-15 seconds or so before it yells at you to take manual control of the steering wheel. There you go, lane tracing assist unavailable soon. There you go, about 10 seconds. That's really all you need, because I figure systems like this really only needed for, I don't know, if you're like taking gloves off if it's cold, taking a coat off, leaning back to get something, which obviously are all things that you wouldn't necessarily want to do while driving, but if you have some kind of an emergency, you have to do something for 5 seconds, the car is able to drive for you for a little bit of time. Adaptive cruise seems to accelerate progressively as you change lanes to make a pass. And, okay, so let's talk about this now. So, in the walk around, we showed not a lot of room in the back cargo area, not a lot of room in the back seat. And it kind of goes along with the overall purpose of this car. Not a lot of companies are making small cars anymore. And Toyota is one of the only companies that still does. They make this, they make the Corolla, they make the Supra, they make the GR86, so they are listening to enthusiasts, of course, with wanting to have small cars. Anyways, I'm getting a little bit off topic already. What I'm trying to say here is, and we're going to sneak behind this EV6, what I'm trying to say here is, this car is not necessarily meant to be a family truckster. You're not really, the intended purpose is not to have this as a family car, to be using the back seat, to be using the cargo area on a daily basis. Now, of course, they do exist to be used from time to time, but this is not going to perform in the way that a Corolla Cross would, that even really a Corolla hatchback would, because of the aerodynamic design. And what this car is built for is this: the morning commute, the kind of single errands. If you're a single person, if you're going somewhere by yourself for a day, this is the car to do that. What are we doing here? What is happening? Okay, I'll give them the fact that they're from Alabama and they use their signal, so it's okay. And they're a fellow Toyota today, so we'll forgive them for that move. But I guess what I'm trying to say is, this car exists to be a solo commuter. In my mind anyways, and I think Toyota intends it to be that as well. The most I think you'd want to do with this is carpool a couple of colleagues in the back that are shorter than 6 foot, and you'd really have no problem. So anyways, what's it like to float down the highway in the Prius? Well, you've got a bit of wind intrusion in this thing, but also consider that it's cold and windy outside, so you are just simply going to have that. Road intrusion we covered. The tires, they're a little bit loud. The wheels make it so there isn't really enough sidewall to compensate some of the expansion joints and imperfections in our road. Man, they are just striking out a lot today. Good luck, person from Alabama. All right, let's turn cruise off. Gosh, just really, really natural inputs here on this thing. Even brake pedal feels really nice. Hybrid brake pedals have come such a long way, and Toyota's been making hybrids now for like 25, 30 years at this point, so they know what's up. They've had plenty of time to calibrate these cars. Oh, and there is a semi-truck on its side. Can you guys see that in the mirror? I was like, where's all the traffic? There's a truck on its roof. Okay. Or actually, that's a fifth wheel, I think. Fifth wheel that was attached to like a 3500 Silverado. Okay, well, I hope everybody involved is okay there. What was I talking about? Oh, inputs. Yeah, no, they all feel great. Seat comfort, pretty nice as well. In this limited trim model, we do have lumbar support, which puts itself out very, very quickly, and lots of adjustment in and out. We can't move the lumbar up and down, but you've got some adjustment there. Driver's seat does feel pretty supportive, and this seat is definitely set up more for comfort. It's pretty squishy, and we have an almost Lexus soft perforated leather on these in the limited model as well. But ergonomically, as far as sitting in this, apart from some of the weird dashboard things that we talked about earlier, you can rest both arms with no problem. Your left arm will be a little bit more comfortable than your right arm because the center console is a little bit more of a harder material. Forward visibility looking straight is fine when you're going down the highway, though these A-pillars do sometimes get in the way when you are pulling into intersections. And overall visibility out of this car is not great. So lucky to have this camera rearview mirror, and it's certainly an option box that I would tick if I were going to be buying a Prius for myself. We're gonna sneak ourselves in here, be nice and agile. Also want to bring up how well put together this interior seems to be. Haven't noticed any rattles. Okay, I'm going to pull off here and get Firehouse subs because the sushi place I was going to go to opens at noon on Sundays, and I was really looking forward to that because normally they open at 11, but then I checked the website and they don't open till noon. So we're going to get Firehouse subs. And this is something non-car related I want to talk about in the comments, and that is fast sub place tier list. I'm going to tell you my opinion here. Obviously, you have Subway at the bottom, D tier. Jimmy John's, a little bit higher than that, and that's probably my most controversial take. I'd put Jimmy John's at like C tier. And then you have places like Firehouse Subs, Potbelly. Those all live, in my opinion, around B tier. And then you get up to A tier, which I would say Jersey Mike's. And I'm talking places around here. I'm sure, you know, I'm in Michigan. Other places have different sub chains. Firehouse is definitely like my second favorite, though. I think it's pretty dang good. Anyways, let's go ahead and get parked up here. Sometimes we don't talk about non-car related stuff enough, I feel like. Sometimes it's important to do that. Man, the steering is so quick that it adjusts the placeability of the car so quickly. Anyways, obviously perfect visibility with that 360 camera, and this car is so tiny that it'll fit pretty much anywhere you want it to fit. Electronic parking brake right there. I'm gonna run in and grab my food real quick, and then we'll run down the street to the dealership. We'll do a sound system test on the way, and we'll wrap up our thoughts on this somewhat abbreviated video of the Prius. And once you're walking back up to the Prius, obviously you can use your keyless entry with proxy key, but I usually like to use the key fob because the Prius plays the first two notes to Jingle Bells. I don't know. I feel like it's a new sound that Toyota's been using with some of their cars, but somewhat entertaining. Okay, anyways, thank you for bearing with me for that. Let's go ahead and get on down the road. I'm going to eat that a little bit later. Not the sweetest sweet tea in the world, but pretty decent. Okay, as we leave here, let's go ahead and do a sound system test on this JBL sound system. And I'm gonna use the classic song. Let's go ahead and do that. That's a LaCrosse Super V8. Nice. Now this volume knob is a super far reach for the driver. Luckily you have a physical button on the steering wheel. I kind of think of that volume knob as for the passenger. And overall, I mean, the JBLs and Toyotas are never class leading and they never really blow me away. This is one of the better ones just because it's newer, it's been newly developed, it's in a newer product. So of course it's gonna perform a little bit better, but you know, it's just, Civic Hybrid was cooking. But it's just not like a rich, satisfying sound that you get from, say, the Bose in a Mazda 3, or what else is good? The Bose in a Honda Civic. So now just a short drive down the road to the Ford dealership. Before we get there, let's go ahead and kind of wrap up our thoughts here on the Prius. I mean, the Topher has like 6 videos on the Prius. I've already got a video on the Prius. I think what I really wanted to learn here was how this regular hybrid all-wheel drive model behaves compared to the Prime. And for most people, this car is going to make the most sense because it's a little bit cheaper. That Prime was like $42,000 or $43,000 that I was driving. So you do save a little bit of money with just the regular hybrid, and you save even more if you don't opt for all-wheel drive, though I do appreciate that they offer it for snowy climates like this, of course. This car itself does still feel plenty refined. The only point in which I find it to feel less refined is the volume of this 2-liter and the extent in which you kind of have to rev it out a bit more, just because of the way that this hybrid system is set up, a little bit different than the car that's a plug-in. But otherwise, I mean, it drives pretty much the same. It doesn't necessarily feel that much slower. I think it's got, you know, like 20 less horsepower or something like that. So it's not a super noticeable difference. And what's still so great about the Prius is that it is, at this point, kind of an enthusiast car, because most people, if they want a Toyota hybrid, are going to buy a Corolla Cross or a RAV4. So you can stand out a bit with the Prius. It looks awesome now, so you don't have to worry about getting made fun of. And it's kind of fun to drive. You sit in this kind of like little pod design with the small steering wheel that only takes minor inputs to make big differences. And it's just kind of a fun, unique experience that you don't really get anymore in the 2024-2025 market. So if you want to be a little bit different, you want something that is super efficient, and you don't really need all that much space, here you go. I mean, you can get one of these from around $28,000. So let's go ahead and pull in here to Gene Buttman Ford, my old stomping grounds. I worked here from the time I was 15 all the way up until solidly like through the end of college. I worked here for a long time. This is where I was all the time before I wore a camera on my face and made these videos. Cool, all right, I'm just gonna stop right here. It's Sunday, there's nobody here. So let's go ahead, throw this in park. We'll give you one last look at it, and that'll wrap it up for us today. Curious to hear in the comments what you guys think about some of the ergonomics of this car, some of the packaging in here, if you think it makes sense, if you think I'm making sense with how I'm kind of justifying it, or if you think this car is ridiculous. I'd like to hear any sort of input you have in the comments. So I'm gonna leave it running today, just because I've got to go park over there and meet my buddy Patrick. But for the purpose of the end of the video, show this thing to you one last time. The reservoir blue is a bit more of a white color because of all of the road salt that they've been throwing down lately. All right, guys, well, that's going to wrap it up for us today. Thank you all so much for watching, and if you've made it this long, thank you for hanging out with me in another Prius video, but that'll do it for us today. and we'll see you in the next one. Take care.